what they learn is marvelous, but there's another aspect to that too, and what we learn from them is probably even more marvelous. It's not only the stupid questions that we all tend to ask one another, but it's also the insights that different human beings bring to you of whatever their age or station. People see things differently. Two heads are better than one. And that kind of an interplay is something that neither the practitioner nor the academic can guarantee. Educational psychologists call that the teachable moment. It's that moment in life when something that happens to you is memorable. And an internship sets that up in a way that teachers spend their lives trying to work out courses and lectures and so forth that will set up teachable moments. And they can tell you how excruciatingly difficult it is to manufacture one artificially in the classroom. Whereas in an internship, you're tripping all over them. So I don't think, and as you probably know, the real push for internships has come, in fact, from academics. And I'm sorry to say that for a long time, a lot of practitioners have resisted the idea. They couldn't be bothered with all you kids, you're getting away. And I can only tell you this in response to that. In my firm, we have interns, some of whom are college juniors. I think we've had even some sophomores as well as graduate students. I spend, a couple hours a day, maybe 2 days with them, talk about a project. We usually turn them loose with that project. We've probably had 50 interns. I've had maybe one or two that wasn't superbly done. One of the problems with interns is that you have to be very careful, obviously, that you don't just leave them alone. I mean, once I spend that day with them, I'm available at all times, or someone is in the firm for them to talk to. But the other problem is that I think too many of us practitioners think we have to lean right over you all the time. And I think my experience is that isn't true. That we've given some really, I gave a study recently to an intern that has now changed the taxation policies of the state in which I live. We knew that it had to be done. We had a pretty good idea what the guidelines were. And this 20-year-old student, I said, this is what you ought to do. I think this is where you ought to gather the data. She applied what she had learned in her public relations training about gathering opinions, testing attitudes, evaluations. Came back with a study that convinced the State Board of Taxation that there were some problems with their policies, and so we now have changed it because of a 20-year-old intern. I think I probably spent a total of maybe 30, 40 hours with this person over a 6-month period. So those practitioners, those of us who have used interns, are finding that, your abilities are something that we want a lot more of. Yes?
What should a public relations specialist do when his employer asks him to lie?
He should quit. No, he should do that secondly. But first, I think, he serves himself and the profession and his employer and society best when he fights the good fight. Will not lie, but will stand in there for what ought to be done. If the institution continues to request that, I think you have no choice but to quit.
And then on your resume you put that you quit.
I think you have to. I think you have to put that. I think it's the only way I know to protect yourself from that. It's a very difficult situation, and I think it takes judgment at the time. I have a friend who's going through that right now with a large, well-known institution in this country. He has opted for what he calls his 90-day short course. In 90 days after he was first asked to do this, he has said, in 90 days, I am either going to be able to convince the people that that's not the thing to do, both pragmatically and ethically. Most ethics are just darn good pragmatism. Or at 90 days, boom, I quit. But he felt that just quitting didn't help anybody because he hadn't had a chance to make his point. So instead, for 90 days, he wants to try some of his persuasive skills and see if he can get that kind of thinking turned around. But after 90 days, he feels that beyond 90 days, he now has become a part of the lie. See, he's no longer fighting against it after 90 days. So after 90 days, he's going to leave.
How about withholding information?
Withholding information is just another form of lying. Just another form of lying. You know what they say in court? The truth, the whole truth. A public relations practitioner, if he just even reads the PRSA Code of Ethics, can see that he or she is bound to put that out. Well, what does that mean in daily practice? What that means in daily practice, that talking about codes of ethics and honesty and all that won't get you very far with a management. But talking about pragmatism will. And today, how many have we got? 5,000 case studies where organizations were done in because they withheld information, starting with Watergate right on down. I think that's an easier one, a lot easier one to show a management. You know, I wouldn't do this because look what happened to Joe and Tom and Pete and Sam and Mary. The one of the lie where you sort of twist it a little bit, that's tougher to deal with. But there's a lot of case studies that are useful there too. A very famous practitioner, a guy named Tommy Ross, who was Ivy Lee's partner in Ivy Lee and T.J. Ross and Associates, said 20 years ago, he was getting an award somewhere, and he said that until practitioners were willing to give up their jobs if necessary over issues like this, there was no sense in us talking about being the newest profession, because we are already members of the oldest. In his typical way, I think he put it very forcefully.
Given the fact that many PR practitioners or workers in any field wouldn't have the fortitude to stand up to their boss and say that they're going to quit rather than tell a lie, would you say that is the greatest failing of PR work today and the people involved in that?
No, I don't think so. I would say that is, as you've already spelled it out, that is nothing more than a failing of all of us as often very weak human beings. That's a part of the human nature I was talking about. I would say that is a failing, but every other profession, every other trade has the same hallmarks. I mean, how do you explain what happens in the law, in the bar? How do you explain the current health care problems, and so on and so forth? The greatest failing in public relations, in my opinion, in practice, is by practitioners, I mean, is that we have not had the foresight. We have not thought big enough. I mean, let me just go back to the view of the world that I expressed to you. I don't know if you agree with it or not, but I think it's demonstrable. Whether you look at it from the discipline of political science, whether you look at it from the discipline of sociology, or whether you just look at it from what's going on around you every day, it is demonstrable that in the Western world, we do operate on a court of public opinion system. Okay. Now, who are the attorneys, the practitioners that represent organizations in the court of public opinion? It's us. Okay, so we are the people, therefore, who have the role in society of seeing that all the ideas get put forth and all the counter views so the court of public opinion can function, so that these ideas can contend in people's minds and finally decisions can be made. Well, if I look at that, that is the most important job in a democratic society. Democratic society cannot function without what we call public relations, particularly a democratic society with 230 million people in one country. And yet, I don't think we have thought of ourselves in that kind of terms. We haven't thought of our role in the social fabric. And that's really what PRSA's objectives are this year and in the years to come, is to get us to raise our sights, to see not only the possibilities that are there for us as professionals, but also the responsibilities. Because that is an awesome responsibility. And I think if you see it in those terms, it's easier then to say to a management, don't lie, don't withhold data. Because you are really speaking to that management, from the public. PRSA had a very high-powered study committee 2 years ago which looked at the role of public relations in society. And they decided that the public relations practitioner, in practical everyday terms, was that person whose job was to be in the middle, interpreting the organization that they represent to its publics, and then interpreting its publics back to the organization. Well, you see what I mean? I mean, that's an absolutely crucial social role in our kind of a system. So I don't think our greatest failing is that, we lie when we're told to lie, or we withhold information, but that I don't think we really see, I don't think that the light has dawned on most of us yet as to just how big the possibilities are for our field.
Mr. James,
Yes.
if the United States suffers a major recession in the 1980s, how will this influence the role of public relations in business?
I think it will make public relations far more important than it is now. The evidence of that is everywhere. We've had some industries have had some pretty bad times. And the old idea that public relations is a sort of an add-on, publicity adjunct, to the marketing department. In those institutions that are slated for survival, that attitude is not around much anymore. Look at the utilities, for example. Supposing that we did have a recession, do you imagine that they're going to cut public relations people? Or are they going to have to continue to add them until they learn to have different policies, which listens to the court of public opinion? I think the evidence is that they're just going to have to do this. Also, instances are more and more commonplace of people who began as public relations professionals who are now the chief executives of their institutions. And so I am not concerned that a recession is going to do in public relations any more than it will do in everybody. If you have a really bad recession, all areas of work, may suffer a decline as unemployment grows. But I think the old days when you cut the public relations department will not occur. Now, having said that, I have to add a caveat. If an organization has a lot of people who are in the positions of doing product publicity and promotional adjuncts, all promotional funds will probably be cut to some extent. And certainly the public relations people, along with advertising budgets and sales promotion people, will suffer their share of that decline. But as far as, taking the vice president for public relations and just getting rid of that person, I don't think you're going to see that. Any other questions? Yes.
What is can you give us some kind of outlook of the job field for public relations graduates now?
Yep.
And predictable in the future?
Okay. If you want to get a job right off, do not try and go into corporate public relations. First of all, it's the slowest paced, it's the hardest to get to the top, it's the most competitive, and therefore you will learn the least in the most time, because they will be less able to give you the full-fledged kind of responsibilities that you feel you want, and for very good reason. They're already darn well organized in public relations, and you're going to have to come along and start at the entry level and work your way up. So if you want to get out and practice very rapidly, get into other kinds of institutions. Get into the hospital field. Get into colleges and universities. The area of this country, the institution in this country that is suffering the most in the area of public relations are colleges and universities. They don't realize, most of them don't even realize yet that the court of public opinion has now discovered them. And believe me, it has discovered them, and it is indicting them every day. And if there is a recession, or even if there isn't, we know now there are finite resources. A lot of the things that colleges and universities have gotten away with for years are changing. It's a great field to get into, and I can tell you that many of the leading practitioners in colleges and universities haven't a shred of training for that job. They came up through some other field. I lecture to those people through their trade association, and I'm always amazed to have some vice president for university relations come up to me and ask me to recommend a good book, and when I recommend Cut, Lip, and Center, he says, "What's the title?" And he or she has never heard of basic things like that. So that's a very good field. School boards, public interest groups, all kinds of activity there. PRSA's own numbers are proof of this. 15 years ago rather, about 80% of PRSA's members were practitioners working for businesses. Today, it's down to about 40%. The other 60% work in these fields that I've included, plus government. Government is a booming, growing area of practice. So if you want to get out and have a lot of responsibility quick, go to a public interest group. See if you can find somebody that's busy around your area trying to change the world, and the social services. That's where I think the growth areas are. Now, a lot of you, may be keenly set on a career in a corporation. Well, there are careers in corporations because corporations are certainly more aware of public relations. But the trouble is they've, been staffed up. They were smart enough, you see, to adopt public relations in its infancy. And so they're already staffed up, and you're going to have to get in line and kind of work your way up. A strategy that a lot of people use is to go out to a public interest organization or a hospital and really get some broad experience and then go to a corporation and try and start not quite at entry level by pointing out how much you've already learned and the contacts you have and the programs that you've carried out. Some of my graduate students over the last 10 years tell me that's been a strategy that's worked for them, to start out at a higher level. I think as far as the number of jobs, that's an interesting question. And the reason it's interesting is part of the greatest sociological revolution now sweeping the world, and that's the decentralization revolution. You know, that is what's happening around the world. Everybody wants to participate in decisions that affect their lives, and the result is that we're decentralizing decisions. However, at the same time, we're a little out of sync with ourselves, and while we know that small is beautiful, we also seem to keep going on with these mergers and these huge entities that keep building up. And huge entities only use a finite number of practitioners. So it could very well be that the total growth in the field won't be as great as one might assume. On the other hand, as these groups decentralize, if they start putting public relations functions in the decentralized units, then the growth will be phenomenal. Any other questions? Yes?
Getting back to curriculum, at Iowa we have 2 courses devoted to public relations, and an issue we see in debate within our chapter PRSA is whether we should opt for more PR courses at the expense of courses dealing with basic communication skills.
Yeah.
I was wondering how you felt about that issue and the side you would take.
Well, I would say definitely you should opt for those other courses. I want to emphasize again that communication is a part of public relations, as it is a part of life. But public relations is